So it happened. Mark Carney walked into the biggest trade war Canada has faced in a generation, and he didn't blink. Donald Trump is sitting in Mar-a-Lago right now, realizing that the playbook he used in 2018 isn't working. Not even close. Because what Carney has done since the day he took office isn't just a series of policy moves. It isn't damage control. It is a systematic dismantling of the assumption that has governed this continent for 70 years that Canada needs the United States more than the United States needs Canada. On March 14, 2025, Mark Carney was sworn in as Canada's 24th Prime Minister. He inherited a country already at war economically. Trump's 25% tariffs had gone live 10 days earlier. Canada had already hit back, and Carney, the man who steered two of the world's most powerful central banks through financial crises, looked directly at the Canadian people and said the old relationship with the United States, the comfortable, taken for granted relationship, was over. Not as a threat, as a fact. What he built next is what this video is about. Because by the end of 2025, North America looked different, and Trump had no one to blame but himself. Let me take you back to the beginning. On February 1st, 2025, Trump signed an executive order announcing 25% tariffs on all Canadian imports. He called it a national security measure. He said Canada wasn't doing enough to stop fentanyl, even though the D-zone data shows more than 90% of fentanyl enters the United States through the southern border, not the northern one. He called the USMCA the deal he personally renegotiated in 2019. The deal he once called the greatest trade deal ever signed, suddenly inadequate. Let that sink in. Trump declared war on his own trade deal. The tariffs went into full effect on March 4th. 25% on everything. Lumber, oil, natural gas, steel, aluminum, all of it. And Trump posted on Truth Social that Canada would be begging to negotiate. He used the word beg. That word told Canada and the entire world exactly what kind of partner America under Trump intended to be. And what did Canada do? Canada hit back immediately. Retaliatory tariffs on American goods went live the same day, March 4th. No hesitation, no panic, just a measured, documented response. Then Carney was sworn in, and on March 27th, he stood before the press and said, direct quote, that when it comes to defending Canadian workers and Canadian sovereignty, nothing is off the table. Not tariffs, not trade realignment, not redirecting energy exports, nothing. He didn't threaten. He listed options. There's a difference. Threats come from insecurity. Options lists come from preparation. Carney had been preparing for exactly this scenario for years. He ran the Bank of Canada through the 2008 financial crisis. He steered the Bank of England through Brexit. He had modeled this, and Trump had not. Here's what Trump didn't calculate, because Donald Trump has never run the numbers on anything more complex than a golf handicap. Canada is, by a wide margin, the single largest supplier of crude oil to the United States. More than 4 million barrels per day cross that border. American refineries, particularly in the Midwest, are physically engineered to process Canadian heavy crude. You cannot flip a switch and replace it. The retooling alone would cost hundreds of billions and take years. Canada also supplies electricity to Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Clean, cheap hydroelectric power keeps the lights on in swing states. That's not a metaphor. That's a grid dependency that American utility companies have been banking on for decades. And then there's uranium. Canada is the second largest uranium producer on the planet, roughly 15% of global production. Republicans have been loudly promoting nuclear energy as America's energy future. You know who can't build a single new reactor without a stable uranium supply? The United States. You know where a significant portion of that uranium comes from? Canada. Carney knows this. He spent years at the highest levels of global central banking studying exactly these resource leverage points. Trump doesn't read briefings. So while Trump was posting about ungrateful trading partners, the actual arithmetic of the relationship was working decisively against him. Canada had leverage he never imagined, and Carney was about to use it quietly, strategically, and permanently. The European Union had been watching. In June 2025, Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, flew personally to Ottawa, not a video call, not an envoy. She boarded a plane. On June 23rd, Canada and the EU announced a new strengthened partnership, a comprehensive deepening of the CETA agreement, covering trade, security, and critical minerals. Von der Leyen called Canada the EU's most important strategic partner in North America. Not in the Western Hemisphere, in North America, which is another way of saying America just got demoted. The deal set in motion a transatlantic critical minerals supply chain that made both Canada and the EU independent of American and Chinese rare earth dependency, and Trump handed them every reason to build it because he wanted to look tough on social media. Then came Mexico. Watching Trump get outmaneuvered by the very countries he built his political identity around bullying is something that almost makes you believe in karma. On September 18, 2025, Carney and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum announced the Canada-Mexico Action Plan 2025 to 2028. New rail connections, expanded port capacity on both coasts, energy corridors. The New York Times described it directly as both countries building trains and ports to skirt the U.S. tariff wall. That's not my language. That's the Times. Mexico gets trade routes that bypass American logistics infrastructure. Canada gets manufacturing. Partnerships replacing American contracts. The United States gets to watch the two largest members of its own free trade agreement build a relationship that treats American geography as an obstacle rather than an asset. And here's the elegant part Carney figured out. You don't need to formally leave a trade agreement to make it strategically irrelevant. You just need to build enough credible alternatives that the agreement becomes a formality, and that is precisely what he has been doing. Now, you might be wondering, how is Canada paying for all of this? Canada's 2025 federal budget committed approximately $280 billion over 5 years in infrastructure and nation building. Ports, rail, energy networks, northern corridors opening direct routes to European and Asian markets. By November 2025, Carney had announced nation-building project tranches totaling more than $116 billion combined, including a $32 billion commitment to Arctic infrastructure with a new deepwater port on Hudson Bay to ship directly to Europe, cutting the United States entirely out of the logistics chain. And how is some of that being financed? Canadian pension funds, the CPP Investment Board, the Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan, the CASE-D. Among the most sophisticated institutional investors on the planet. Carney understands that long-term infrastructure, classified as a national security priority, is exactly what these funds are built to hold. He is directing the most patient capital in the world toward the most permanent strategic goal in Canada's modern history. He's building an economic fortress with ordinary Canadians' retirement savings. Completely legal, completely working. So you'd think Republicans in Congress would step in, pull the emergency brake, act like adults. Wrong, or almost right. Because what happened in Congress is more damning than silence. On April 2, 2025, the United States Senate voted 51-48 to pass a resolution effectively ending Trump's tariffs on Canada. For Republicans broke with their party, Senator Susan Collins of Maine, Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. Senators from agriculture and energy states made clear that Canadian trade was essential to their constituents. And what did Trump do? He posted that Collins and the others were playing with the lives of the American people. He targeted them by name, threatened their primaries, and the House killed the resolution anyway. So Congress did functionally nothing while America's largest trading relationship deteriorated because they were more afraid of a truth social post than a $600 billion trade relationship collapsing. Which brings us to what Carney has actually built. Not a single speech, a policy architecture. 5 areas of strategic reorientation. Area 1. Energy. Canada's energy export soil. Gas, hydroelectric are now explicitly strategic sovereign assets. Carney's government has accelerated negotiations with European and Asian buyers too. Diversify away from American dependency. Area 2. Pharmaceuticals. Millions of Americans rely on Canadian pharmacies for affordable insulin, heart medication, and antibiotics. Carney's government has flagged that dependency as a policy lever. Any disruption flows directly to the American pharmacy counter. Area 3. Manufacturing. Partnerships. The Canada-Mexico Action Plan formalizes that North American supply chains can be restructured to reduce American geographic centrality. Auto parts, electronics, textiles, all being redesigned with alternative routing. Area 4. Critical minerals. Canada has launched a formal strategy supplying democratic allies, not adversaries. New agreements with the UK, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and EU members. The days of assumed American access are over. Area 5. Digital sovereignty. Canada is building its domestic data infrastructure and reducing technological dependency on American cloud platforms over time. Not anti-American, strategic resilience. 5 areas, each one a pillar of the same architecture. A Canada that has options, has built alternatives, and no longer assumes American partnership is permanent. So where do the numbers land? The TSX climbed 4.7% in the first 5 months of 2025, outperforming major American indices. By year-end, the TSX posted its biggest annual gain in more than 15 years. Canadian exports diversified. The share going to the United States fell from nearly 73% to 67% in a single year, not because Canada was shrinking, but because Canadian companies were building new customers and applications for Canadian permanent residency from Americans. Up measurably, documentably, a real, verifiable trend. Immigration lawyers on both sides of the border reported throughout 2025. Young, educated Americans watching Canada's policy direction and making a calculation. So where does this go? Trump has three options and they are all bad. Option 1, back down. Admit the tariffs were a mistake. Acknowledge Canada as a strategic equal, but that requires admitting error. So that's not happening. Option 2, double down. Keep the tariffs. Watch gas prices rise as Midwest refineries struggle. Watch heating costs climb. Watch prescription costs skyrocket. Then blame Canada. This is the most Trumpian option and the most probable. Option 3, escalate, invoke emergency powers. Declare Canadian energy a national security threat. This is the nightmare scenario, not because it works, but because it proves to every remaining ally watching from Brussels to Tokyo, to Canberra, that the United States is structurally, genuinely unreliable. And here's the thing. Carney has contingency plans for all three. He ran the Bank of Canada. He ran the Bank of England. He has stress-tested more economic scenarios than Trump has read briefings. Impulsive leaders are, by definition, predictable, and beyond that. Canada has been in conversations with Australia, the world's second-largest lithium producer, about coordinated resource policy among democratic allies. Canada controls uranium, Australia controls lithium. Together with New Zealand, the UK, and potentially India, you are looking at a resource coalition controlling the inputs for green energy, nuclear power, and advanced manufacturing, and the United States is not necessarily inside it. Trump was so fixated on China, he missed the possibility that America's oldest allies might just build their own system and leave. And we need to talk about what is happening in Canadian streets. This is not just government policy. This is a national identity moment. Polling throughout 2025 shows over 2/3 of Canadians consistently avoiding American goods and supporting Canadian alternatives. The Harris poll documented a clear surge in Canadian economic nationalism starting in early 2025. An Ipsos survey found the overwhelming majority of Canadians would continue prioritizing Canadian products even after tensions ease. There is a Buy Canadian movement that has reshaped retail strategy for major chains. Tim Hortons and other iconic brands saw a consumer pride surge that corporate Canada had to respond to publicly. This is a country that has been, for most of its modern history, politely differential toward its larger neighbor, accommodating, patient, and they have collectively, quietly, decisively decided they are done. Trump called Canada weak. Canada is showing him, through bond markets and trade flows and diplomatic realignment, what quiet strength looks like. Trade policy is not just about money. It's about trust, and the United States has systematically burned the trust that took 70 years to build. So if you are an American, here is what this means for your life. If you live in Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, or any northern state, your electricity bills are a policy decision away from rising. Canadian hydroelectric power has been structurally subsidizing American grid costs for decades. If you drive a car, the gas price math is real. Midwest refineries are engineered for Canadian heavy crude. Switching means expensive retooling or importing more expensive Middle Eastern crude that cost lands at the pump. If you take prescription medication, any medication, the cross-border pharmacy system that has let millions of Americans afford insulin and heart drugs depends on a cooperative Canada-US relationship. Disrupt it long enough and prices snap back to what American pharmaceutical companies actually charge 3 to 4 times higher. That is not politics. That is the price list. And if you are young, 25, 30 years old, figuring out where to build a life, Canada just became a dramatically more attractive option. Political stability, universal health care, long-term infrastructure investment instead of culture war spectacles. Trump is not just driving trade partners away, he is driving talent away. He doesn't see it, but the data does. So let me bring this to what is really happening. This is the beginning of the end of automatic American dominance in North America. Not globally, the US is still the largest economy, still has the most powerful military. But in North America, the assumption that the United States sets the terms and Canada and Mexico simply comply is over. Carney demonstrated that a mid-sized country with experienced strategic leadership can methodically reposition itself away from a superpower led by an impulsive transactional government. He did it without firing a shot, without raising his voice. He built alternatives and waited for the tariff policy to make those alternatives viable, and the model works. Other countries are watching: Australia, South Korea. European nations exhausted by being caught between American unilateralism and Chinese authoritarianism. They are all thinking, maybe we don't have to choose. Maybe we can build our own path, because here is the question American media hasn't asked clearly. Enough. What if Canada has been right all along? What if this is not Canada abandoning America, but Canada finally standing up for itself after decades of being taken for granted? Carney is not being aggressive. He is being assertive. There is a difference. Aggression is unprovoked. Assertiveness is setting boundaries after those boundaries have been serially violated. And now Canada is saying, no more. We are building our own future. You are welcome to be part of it on equal terms, but the era of automatic deference is over. That is not betrayal. That is self-respect. Mark your calendars. Watch the trade flows. Watch the TSX. Watch the Canadian dollar. Watch which economy is diversifying and which one is contracting. The data will answer the question American media has been too polite to ask, and I will be right here when it does. Don't go anywhere.